And we stand for this. And a few people can't control the direction of the world. Well, we'll give our power away to this extent. It's a doddle. Interestingly, 2 presidents of the United States in the history of that country have suggested and in some small way begun to introduce interest-free money that wasn't borrowed from the banking cartels and interest paid on it. Those 2 presidents were Abraham Lincoln and John F. Kennedy. They have one other thing in common, you might recall. But perhaps the most grotesque aspect of this whole nonsense of interest on money is what we call third world debt. Third world debt has crucified vast tracts of our fellow humanity and continues to do minute by minute. The third world debt is debt on money that has never, does not, and will never exist. Last time I saw the figures, around 400,000 children in Brazil died from hunger-related disease every year. And at the time I saw those figures, Brazil was the 2nd biggest exporter of food in the world. And the money received from that export, great chunks of it, were servicing interest on money that has never existed. And as one Brazilian official I was reading about recently said, most of the money that constitutes the Brazilian debt never left the computer systems of Wall Street. My God, it's time for a turning of the tide. Why can't governments print their own money interest-free and lend it to people interest-free, so we buy one house to live in one house instead of 3? So we don't have to inflate the price of everything because everyone's got a service interest on money that doesn't exist. Why? Because it's possible. The will is not there. And why is it that no political party that I've come across anywhere in the world that has any chance of forming a government is actually suggesting that that be done? Because the same people that control the banking system control the political system in the global one-party state. There's one other thing I'll talk about before I look at solutions, which are very simple. Very simple. And that's the microchipped population. That's the one that probably sounds most bizarre, as I said earlier. But it is so close. We're already microchipping domestic animals as a matter of course. The Queen's had the corgis done. Did you see that? Last year, she's had the corgis microchipped and linked to a computer. Prince Charles, next you watch. Maybe. Sort him out. Funny. The technique that is being used to bring in the microchip population is another major mass mind manipulating technique. I call it the stepping stones technique. And a very good example of that is the European Union and what they have in America, the North American Free Trade Agreement, which is a free trade area, which is where the European Union started out, if you recall, and also what's happening in another free trade area in the Pacific Australia area known as APEC. The idea is to have the world government, and the bank and all the rest of it, and the next stage down from that will be the European Union, the American Union, which will be this North American free trade area, right the way through the Americas, from North to South America, in an American version of the European Union, and a Pacific version of it. They will be the 3 next stages down from the world government. And the stepping stones technique is how they're being introduced. If you take the European Union, if you started out at the end of the last war, and what we're heading to now had been suggested, one bank, one currency, centralized control of a superstate, understandably, I know what my father would have said, who fought in that war. Excuse me a minute, can I just have a quick word here? We've just spent the last 5 years with 55 million people killed and many more severely injured to stop that happening. And you're asking us to do it without a bullet being fired. You must be joking. Go and have a cup of tea. So what the stepping stones technique does, although it knows where it's heading, it does it in stages. It gets away with what it can get away with first of all, and then starts to move it along, and it presents every step as independent of all the others, so you don't see the pattern. So what was suggested after the last war? Not a European superstate, because that had no chance at that time. It was the common market, just a free trade area, ladies and gentlemen, nothing to worry about. And by the way, if we don't join, we starve. Little problem like that, you know. Well, we'd better join then, I guess, you know. So, suddenly, some of the states of Europe start to fuse their economies together in a free trade area. Now we're in the web, because it's suggested very strongly that if anyone pulls out, there will be economic chaos, certainly in the short term. So now we're in the spider's web. So the process then starts of evolving a free trade area into a European centralized superstate. And first we start having commissions which start dictating to nation states. Then we have talk about the central bank. And interestingly, you know, one of the things that was put forward to justify the one currency was the currency chaos in Europe. Like when the pound fell out of the European monetary system after the government had spent a colossal fortune trying to keep it in there a few years ago. Well, you know, this currency chaos, one currency would sort this problem. Interesting, therefore, that the person who attacked the pound and caused that chaos was a frontman for the House of Rothschild called George Soros, a world currency speculator. George Soros, Bilderberg Group. The Chancellor at the time, who spent all that money and eventually pulled the pound out of the monetary system of Europe, was Norman Lamont, Bilderberg Group. Now, when I was talking in Sweden just a few weeks ago, I was talking about this, and some member of the audience in Sweden came up and said, I couldn't believe it when you mentioned that guy, George Soros. He said, what happened in Sweden, he said, was before we went into the European community, all the opinion polls were very strongly against going in. He said, then this guy, George Soros, Bilderberg Group, started attacking the Swedish currency. The Swedish government tried to defend the currency under the prime ministership of Carl Bildt, Bilderberg Group, and eventually chaos ensued. And a great fear started to go into the Swedish psyche of, oh my goodness, we need protection. What's going on here? We can't stand alone. Even speculators are taking our currency apart. After that, the opinion polls for going into the European community flipped to the majority saying yes, and in they went. So now, stepping stones, we're now in a situation where we are light years away from what we actually joined. Stepping stones. Only now are some people saying, excuse me, have you seen how far we've come? It's interesting that right along the line, as the stepping stones are put forward, anyone who challenges the stepping stones is then manipulated into continuing the journey.